Welcome back. The US says it wants to strike a new arms control deal with Russia, China and other countries. Speaking at the White House, President Donald Trump said the arms control treaty will also include nuclear weapons. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow's response will depend on the nature of the US proposals. But Trump did not say if Washington will extend the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty or New START with Russia. New START is the only nuclear treaty between the US and Russia, and it will end in 2 years. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned of a new nuclear arms race if Washington fails to extend the pact. The US has formally notified the United Nations of its withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. This makes the United States the only country in the world opting out of the pact. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo submitted the paperwork to begin the year-long exit process. Pompeo said the agreement had imposed an unfair economic burden on the US. He said Washington has reduced all types of emissions regardless of the climate accord. The Trump administration has also pulled US funding that helps the developing world cut emissions. The US has imposed sanctions on 9 people and 1 company linked to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The country's judiciary chief and Supreme Leader's son Mujtaba Khamenei are among the targeted. Washington also sanctioned the General Staff of Iran's armed forces. The Treasury Department accused the sanctioned individuals of being involved in the torture and extrajudicial killings of civilians. The move coincides with the 40th anniversary of Iran's seizure of the US Embassy in Tehran in 1979. The people of Iran are commemorating the anniversary of the 1979 US Embassy seizure, when 50 American embassy employees, ranging from the charge d'affaires to the lower staff, were taken hostage for 444 days. The incident is seen as the beginning of hostilities between Tehran and Washington around the world. More in this report.
The 40th anniversary of the 1979 US Embassy seizure comes at a time of escalating tensions between Tehran and Washington. Though there was a slight thaw in bilateral relations in the Obama era when the two countries signed the Iran nuclear deal, the progress made was reversed when the Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA last year and imposed economic sanctions on Iran.
Our nation sends this message to the whole world that if an invasion or conspiracy is staged against us, we will resist with all heart and power against it. We will not begin a war, but if someone else does, they will certainly regret it.
Iranian state media says around 1,000 rallies and marches were recorded across the country, but the biggest one was held around the former US Embassy, which state officials have dubbed a den of spies.
The Americans will continue their hostilities, like the proverbial poisonous scorpion whose nature is to sting and cannot be stopped unless it is crushed.
Earlier, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei ruled out talks with Washington, saying they were a ruse to infiltrate Tehran. With protests and civil wars already consuming the Middle East, this does not bode well for the region. And with Iran withdrawing further from its JCPOA commitments, the situation is not likely to change soon.
Yemen's government will sign a power-sharing agreement with southern separatists today. The deal is aimed to end the country's long-running civil war.
Yemen's Information Minister Muammar al-Eryani said the signing ceremony for the Riyadh Agreement would take place in Riyadh. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Yemeni President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi will attend the ceremony. The power-sharing deal would see the secessionist Southern Transitional Council handed a number of ministries. The government will also return to the main southern city of Aden. The Saudi ambassador to Yemen, Mohammed Al-Jabbar, said Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan will represent the UAE at the ceremony. The UAE is the main partner in the Saudi-led coalition backing Hadi's government. The clashes between the separatists and the government supporters had raised fears the country could break up.
The first meeting of a 45-member body charged with writing a new constitution for Syria has ended positively. Co-chair of the opposition grouping, Hadi al-Bahra, says it agreed the agenda and mechanism to produce the country's governing document. Al-Bahra said there was consensus amongst everyone involved. On Sunday, the UN envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, issued a mutually agreed code of conduct. The panel has 15 representatives, each from government, opposition and civil society. The decision to set up the body was made during the Syrian National Dialogue Congress in January 2018. Egypt's military says it has killed at least 83 militants during raids in the Restif Sinai region since October 28th. It says 3 army personnel, including an officer, were killed in the clashes. A statement from the army said 6 highly dangerous terrorists were among dead. It said 61 extremists and other wanted people were arrested during the raids. The army said over 350 explosive devices planted to target security forces were dismantled during the operation. President Xi Jinping has pledged to further open China's economy a day after Beijing and 14 leading Asia-Pacific nations agreed on a free trade deal. The Chinese president was speaking at the opening session of the China International Import Expo in Shanghai. Speaking amid ongoing trade negotiations between the US and China, Xi called on the world to knock down walls instead of building them. Addressing an audience including French President Macron, Xi pressed the international community to oppose protectionism and reduce trade barriers. For more on the story, we are joined live from Beijing by our correspondent Patrick Falk. Now, Mr. Falk, tell us, following the agreement of 15 countries on the RCEP free trade deal in Bangkok yesterday, China looks to have seized the economic advantage over the US and India in Asia. How do you expect that to reflect in China's trade negotiations with the US?
Well, certainly this is positive news for China. From the American perspective, it's unlikely to change the negotiations in any meaningful way as far as the Americans are concerned. And we got an idea about this from White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow over the weekend. It is more or less a done deal, the phase 1 of this trade agreement. He said that the agricultural chapter was virtually completed, and that would include not only an increase in purchases of US farm goods by China, but also the removal of barriers and what he called some sort of difficult regulations that would essentially make it easier for US farmers to access the Chinese market. He said that on currency stability, that was virtually wrapped up. And he also said on the ability for American financial services companies to own 100% of operations in China. He said that was virtually wrapped up as well. So like I say, as far as the Americans are concerned, the deal is more or less done, and all that remains to be done now is for the two sides to come together and sign on the dotted line. From the Chinese perspective, though, we are hearing reports that as part of this deal, the Chinese are expecting the Americans to remove the tariffs that were due to kick in on December 15th. Now, there are reports that have emerged overnight saying that China is now pushing for further tariffs to be removed, specifically some of the tariffs that had been implemented in September. And there is an argument that this may have emboldened China to some extent to push for further concessions. At the end of the day, remember, this RCEP deal, even without India, includes 1/3 of the world's population. So there is an argument that China doesn't need to rely on the US to any extent. But at the same time, China will be wanting some sort of immediate improvement to its economic situation, and that does depend on the US coming to some sort of trade agreement with it. And so it is difficult to see this changing these negotiations in any meaningful way in the short term. With regards to a longer term agreement, it may have further impact, I suppose.
All right. The US has responded to the agreement on RCEP by reiterating its commitment to allies in the Asia-Pacific and by announcing a special US-ASEAN summit early next year. Has the US been able to maintain the trust of its allies since withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Pact, or has Trump's unilateralism undermined American influence in the region?
Well, the other thing you have to take into account is that the US sent a lower-level delegation to the ASEAN summit this year. So that does send quite a specific message to its ASEAN allies that perhaps it wasn't paying as much attention to the region, even if Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, who was attending in Bangkok, insisted that that wasn't the case, and Donald Trump was very much focused on the region. Of course, the US is focused on what's happening around that area, not least because of China's moves in the South China Sea. That is something that ASEAN will be very much concerned about as well, and will want the US to balance China's dominance in the region. So that is, I suppose, why he has reached out for this special summit to take place later on next year, and to show that he is committed to the region still. But certainly the lack of a sort of more senior official being present in Bangkok will have raised some eyebrows, and that is why, of course, some ASEAN nations didn't send their own leaders. Only the leaders of Thailand, Laos and Vietnam attended in Bangkok this time around.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. We were talking to our Beijing correspondent, Patrick Falk. We are taking a short break. Stay with us. Britain has lowered its national terrorism threat level to substantial from severe. Home Secretary Priti Patel made the announcement as the country prepares for a general election next month. Patel said despite the change in threat level, terrorism remains one of the biggest risks to UK national security. She added, the substantial threat level indicates a high level of threat and an attack might occur without further warning. The threat level has been severe since September 2017, when it was reduced from critical. Intelligence chiefs raised the level in May 2017 following the Manchester Arena bombing, which claimed 22 lives. The level is set by the Joint Terrorism Analysis Center, which weighs up available intelligence and the capability of known terrorist groups. Romania's parliament has voted to approve a new cabinet led by Prime Minister Ludovic Orban, the leader of the Liberal Party. Needing 233 votes to take office, Mr. Orban's government was backed by 240 MPs and senators. Most lawmakers from the previous ruling party, the PSD, and its unofficial allies, the pro-Romania party, boycotted the vote. Orban said his government took office after the dismissal of an administration that did a lot of damage to Romania. The result has unlocked the process to nominate Romania's European Commissioner, ending a gridlock that affected bloc's policy-making body. In Ukraine, government soldiers and Moscow-backed separatists have deferred a troop pullback in eastern Ukraine. The sides completed a long-stalled withdrawal in Zolote in the Lugansk region last week. They were scheduled to begin a similar pullback in the Donetsk region on Monday. But Kiev said it could not proceed because of ceasefire violations by Kremlin-backed separatists. The withdrawal is a precondition for the first face-to-face talks between Russian President Putin and Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. China has successfully launched the 49th satellite in its Beidou navigation satellite system. It was launched into space from the Zhejiang Satellite Launch Center in southwest Sichuan province. It is the 24th and last satellite of the BDS-3 system, a global geolocation network. More than 300 research units and tens of thousands of personnel have worked on the project in the last 2 years to complete 16 satellite launch missions. Today's launch was the 317th mission for China's Long March rockets. Stock markets across Asia have surged on the back of record overnight close on Wall Street. Investors are increasingly optimistic that a trade deal will soon be signed by the US and China. The investors have also been assured by positive US economic data and a strong corporate earnings season. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index is leading gains after jumping nearly 2%. The Shanghai Composite has risen by almost 1%. That is despite occasion surveys showing services sector activity in China slowed to an 8-month low in October. Hong Kong's Hang Seng has also picked up more than 0.5%. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. That is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.